guys, in this video we're going to look at Mendel's 4 hypotheses, and we're also going to learn a couple of definitions and some important words that we're going to learn about and talk about as we go through this process of inheritance. And also you're going to see several words that are going to come on your test, and you have to know what they mean. Things like hybrid, allele, locus, homozygous, heterozygous, genotype, phenotype. There are a lot of definitions in this chapter 9. So as we go through Mendel's 4 hypotheses, I will show you some examples of places where all these words come into play. So remember, when you're a good scientist, you have your question. So Mendel's question was, why do some traits disappear as you go through the generations of your pea plants? So he came up with 4 hypotheses of why this was happening. And remember, good scientists always says there are hypotheses first, then they do their experiments, and then they look at the results and see if they match up with what their hypothesis said. So here were Mendel's 4 hypotheses. So he said that there are alternative versions of genes. And remember, he didn't know about genes, so he said there are alternative versions of factors, things like purple flower factor, white flower factor. But nowadays we would call these genes, but back then Mendel didn't know that genes existed. But he did think that there were alternative factors that accounted for variations in inherited characteristics. And he thought that for each character, for each thing like pea shape, flower color, that the pea inherited 2 alleles. And again, he didn't mention the word alleles because he didn't know about those yet, right? But we would now call these versions of genes alleles. And one of these versions comes from each parent. So he was thinking that some genetic data comes from the male sperm, more genetic data comes from the female sperm, and then your offspring is going to be a mixture of these 2 characteristics, and it could have genetic data from the dad and genetic data from the mom, right? So then he said if the 2 alleles of the inherited pair differ, that will determine the organism's appearance, and the one that's more important is going to be called the dominant trait. So we're going to see that there are dominant traits which overshadow recessive traits. So we'll see a good example of that coming up. But he had this idea that some factors are dominant over other factors. And then the sperm or the egg carries 1 allele. So then when you get together during fertilization, you get 1 copy from your mother and 1 copy from the father, and then that's what ends up inside the zygote. So these were his hypotheses. So then he started studying his peas and investigating. But let's look at each one in modern terminology, and let's see some of the key things that we need to know about these hypotheses using our modern terminology. So in a normal human cell and inside your chromosomes, remember humans have 46 chromosomes, and remember they're in pairs. So you get 1 chromosome from your dad, right? That's the parental chromosome, the paternal chromosome. And then you get the other one from your mom, that's the maternal chromosome. And then remember, your dad could have blue eyes, your mom could have brown eyes. So you will inherit both the gene for both of those traits, right? You will inherit the gene for blue eyes, you will inherit the gene for brown eyes. But what color eyes are you going to have? It'll depend on which one of those 2 is dominant. But Mendel came up with the idea that we get these factors, these genes, 1 comes from the male parent, 1 comes from the female parent, and they don't have to be the same. There can be alternative forms on the maternal parent and on the maternal chromosome and the paternal chromosome, right? So alternative forms of a gene are called alleles. So if you have homologous chromosomes like this, where there's one gene for 1 trait on one of those and a gene for a different trait on the other, those are alleles, alternative forms of a gene. Now, where a gene is located on the chromosome is called its locus. And when you think about it, locus kind of sounds like the start of location. So a locus is where a gene is located on a particular chromosome. So you can say the gene for eye color is on chromosome 5, right? Or something like that. So you can tell where a gene is located in chromosomes because remember, we did the Human Genome Project. They mapped the major genes for most of the body's important proteins during the Human Genome Project. So they have an idea of the genes for what things are on which chromosomes. So they call that the locus or the location. So then next hypothesis was that every organism is going to have two alleles, one from the mom, one from the dad, right? The alleles might be the same or they could be different. So we have words to describe this. If the alleles are the same or identical, they're called homozygous alleles. And if the alleles are different, they're called heterozygous alleles. Now, when we go to do genetics problems, we are going to give our alleles a letter that designates what they are. So for example, here, if this was the gene for brown eyes, we would put a big B, right? And if this was the gene for brown eyes, we would put a big B. So this person would have the genetic code, big B, right? Brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes. So whenever you see a capital letter, that's the dominant one, right? And whenever you see a small letter, that's the recessive one. So when we do genetics problems, we designate a letter that's going to stand for that particular genetic trait or that particular gene. Just like I put a big B here for brown eyes, a big B here for brown eyes. Now on this person, they have two different alleles. So here's a brown eye, so we'll give that a big B again, but here's blue eyes, and blue eyes are recessive to brown eyes, so I'm going to give that a small b. So if I was writing the genetic code for this person, I would write big B, small b, right? This signifies that they're carrying the gene for brown eyes and the gene for blue eyes, okay? Now these two letters are different, so that's how you know you've got a heterozygous individual, okay? So we're going to use this terminology for all of our genetics problems whenever we're trying to work out what would happen. So for example, if we wanted to know what's going to happen if this individual, if this person's John, right, and this person over here is Mary, we want to know if John and Mary got together, what color eyes would their baby have, right? So we know that John's genetic code is big B, and we're going to cross that with Mary's genetic code, big B, little b, and then we're going to find out what color eyes, or what's the probability of their baby having brown eyes, what's the probability of their baby having blue eyes. So it's very important that you get this terminology. If it says heterozygous, that means you got a big letter and a small letter. If it says homozygous, that means the two letters are the same. Now, in this case, we had brown eyes, so I gave it big B, but if these were both blue, that would be little b, right? So homozygous means that both the letters are the same. So both letters are the same in homozygous, both letters are different, right, in heterozygous. So we're going to use this as we go through learn how to do Punnett squares. So the next thing we've mentioned is that if the two alleles are of the inherited pair differ, one determines the organism's appearance and is the dominant one. So in the case of the person who has the genetic code big B, little b, so we know big B stands for brown eyes, little b stands for blue eyes. So if you have this genetic code inside your cells, what color are your eyes going to be? Remember, the letter that is the big letter is always the dominant one. So the dominant trait will overshadow the recessive trait. So if you have the genes for brown eyes and the genes for blue eyes, what color are your eyes going to be? They're going to be the dominant color. You will have brown eyes, okay? So we're going to use this as we go through and as we study the different genetic problems that we have to do. So dominant is going to determine the appearance of the organism, and then we're always going to describe dominant with a big letter, a big B, right? And then recessive will always be overshadowed. So if you have somebody who's big B, little b, the big B always wins. The dominant trait always overshadows the recessive trait, at least in Mendelian genetics. We'll see later that there are some exceptions to Mendel's rules, but we're mainly studying Mendelian genetics. So for now, we're going to say that dominant traits overshadow recessive traits. So our recessive trait, in this case, we would represent with a small b, okay? So then, in his last hypothesis, Mendel said that the sperm or the egg only carries one allele for each character, because the alleles are going to separate during gamete production. And we saw that because we studied meiosis. We saw that you start off with a pair of homologous chromosomes, then you make copies of each homologous chromosome, and then during meiosis 1, those homologous chromosomes separate, and then during meiosis 2, the sister chromatids separate. So if you're a human and you start off with 46 chromosomes in your original cell inside the testes, each sperm has 23 chromosomes, right? It's only carrying one gene for the particular trait. So, and then when the egg and the sperm get together, that's when you get the homologous pairs again, okay? So Mendel's hypotheses were sound, and we know that they do work today. So here's two more words that, again, you see in a lot of the questions that you're going to have to answer: genotype and phenotype. Genotype is what is the genetic code that's inside the cell. So the genotype would be big B, or big B, little b, or little b, little b. These would all be genotypes. They're describing what genetic code is inside the chromosomes, inside the nucleus of your cell. So this person has 2 genes and they both say to have brown eyes. So this person will definitely have brown eyes. This person has a gene for brown eyes and a gene for blue eyes. They're heterozygous, right? So, but again, because a dominant gene overshadows a recessive gene, this person will have brown eyes. And this person has 2 little b's, so they will have blue eyes. And again, these are going to be homozygous. The letters are the same. So your genotype is when you're telling somebody what genetic alleles are present inside a person's chromosomes. Now, the phenotype is what they look like. So for our BB, the phenotype would be brown eyes, right? For our big B, little b, the phenotype would be brown eyes. And for little b, the phenotype would be blue eyes. So if you're asked for the phenotype, you're telling the person what trait is expressed on the outside. Which of those genes is the one that the body is making the protein from? So your genotype dictates your phenotype. So once the gene is there, you can make the protein. And remember, all these things, eye color, hair color, they're all due to proteins that are in your eyes or your hair that give them that particular color. So if you have the gene, you can make the protein, okay? And remember, if you've got 2 letters that are the same, that's called homozygous. So this one and this one are both homozygous. And then if the 2 letters are different, that's called heterozygous. So you'll see these words, genotype and phenotype, coming up in exam questions. So like I said, homozygous, both alleles are identical. So you're going to have 2 big letters or 2 small letters. The key thing is here that the letters match, right? So when you're homozygous, you got the same 2 big A's or 2 small A's, but the letters match each other. When you got heterozygous, the letters are different, right? You got big A, little a, big B, little b. These are all heterozygous. So remember, if you are homozygous, both copies of the gene are the same on the pair of homologous chromosomes. If you're heterozygous, the copies of the gene are different on the homologous chromosomes. So these are words we're going to see all the time when we're solving genetics questions. Okay, so that was Mendel's 4 hypotheses, and then a lot of vocabulary that we're going to use constantly to solve genetics problems.